Mom, they arrested Sophia. My mother's voice came through the phone, but instead of the panic I expected, there was something else. Satisfaction. The police just took her away in handcuffs. She was caught red-handed stealing from Millbrook's department store. I felt my world tilt sideways. My 15-year-old daughter arrested for shoplifting? But when I discovered the truth about what really happened that day, I realized my own mother had orchestrated the entire thing. I never looked at her the same way again. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my cramped office at Riverside Marketing Solutions in downtown Clearwater Bay. Outside my window, the autumn leaves were just beginning to turn gold, and the harbor was dotted with sailboats catching the last warm breezes of the season. It was one of those perfectly ordinary October days that trick you into thinking life is predictable, manageable, safe. I should have known better. My phone buzzed against the stack of client proposals I'd been pretending to focus on for the past hour. The truth was, I'd been distracted all morning by a nagging feeling I couldn't shake, that peculiar anxiety that crawls up your spine when something important is about to go wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on what. When I saw my mother's name on the caller ID, that anxiety crystallized into something sharper. Margaret Whitmore didn't call during business hours. Ever. In fact, Margaret didn't call much at all, unless she needed something, which usually meant money, a favor, or someone to blame for whatever drama was currently consuming her life. "Hello, Mom," I said, wedging the phone between my ear and shoulder while I continued typing. I had learned long ago that the best way to handle my mother's calls was to multitask. It kept me grounded in reality while she spun whatever web of chaos she was weaving that particular day. "Cassandra?" Her voice was crisp, formal, the way she said my name when she was about to deliver news she considered important. "I'm calling from Millbrook's department store on Fifth Avenue. There's been an incident." My fingers stopped moving across the keyboard. Millbrook's was the upscale department store where my mother worked part-time as a sales associate in the cosmetics department, a job she had taken 6 months ago after her latest boyfriend, Derek, had moved out and taken his financial contributions with him. It was also, coincidentally, Sophia's favorite place to window shop when she was supposed to be at her after-school study group. "What kind of incident?" I asked, though something in my mother's tone was already making my stomach clench. "It's about Sophia." The world seemed to slow down, the way it does in those moments when you know your life is about to change, but you haven't quite processed how. Through my office window, I watched a seagull land on the harbor railing, its movements sharp and precise against the backdrop of ordinary people living ordinary lives, completely unaware that my universe was tilting off its axis. "What about Sophia?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "She's been arrested, Cassandra, for shoplifting." The words hit me like cold water. I pushed back from my desk so abruptly that my chair rolled into the filing cabinet behind me with a metallic clang that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "Arrested? What are you talking about? Sophia's supposed to be at Jefferson High for study hall. She doesn't even—" "She was here, in the store, with those friends of hers. That Riley girl and the tall one with the colored hair. What's her name? Zoe? They were acting suspicious, so I kept an eye on them. Sure enough, I caught Sophia, red-handed, stuffing a designer scarf into her backpack." I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. Nothing about this made sense. Sophia had never stolen anything in her life. She was the kid who returned extra change to cashiers and felt guilty when she accidentally took too many napkins at fast food restaurants. The idea of her shoplifting was so foreign to everything I knew about my daughter that I felt like my mother was describing a complete stranger. "Mom, there has to be some mistake. Sophia wouldn't—" "I saw what I saw, Cassandra. And frankly, I'm not surprised. The way you've been raising that girl, letting her run wild with those friends, no discipline, no structure. I've been waiting for something like this to happen." The words stung because they hit every insecurity I'd carried as a single mother since my divorce 3 years ago. Every night I'd lain awake wondering if I was doing enough, being enough, providing enough structure and guidance while trying to balance work and parenting and my own emotional recovery from a marriage that had crumbled under the weight of my ex-husband's gambling addiction. "Where is she now?" I managed to ask. The police took her to the juvenile detention center on Maple Street. They'll probably call you soon to come pick her up, assuming they don't decide to keep her overnight. Honestly, Cassandra, maybe a night in jail is exactly what that girl needs to understand. There are consequences for her actions. There was something in her mother's tone that made my skin crawl, a satisfaction that went beyond concern for Sophia's moral development. It was the tone she used when she'd won an argument, when she had proven a point she'd been trying to make for years. "I'm leaving work now," I said, already grabbing my purse and car keys. "I'll figure out what happened and handle it."
"Good luck with that," Margaret said, and I could practically hear her smug smile through the phone. "You might want to start thinking about some real consequences for once, instead of just excusing her behavior like you always do." The line went dead. I stood in my office for a moment, staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. Outside, the seagull was still perched on the harbor railing, preening its feathers with mechanical precision. Cars moved along Harbor Drive in their usual afternoon patterns. The world kept spinning as if nothing had changed, but I felt like I was standing in the eye of a hurricane that was about to tear through everything I thought I knew about my family. My hands were shaking as I typed out a quick email to my boss, explaining that there was a family emergency and I needed to leave immediately. Linda Harrison was a mother herself. She'd understand. At least, I hoped she would. This was exactly the kind of crisis that reminded me how precarious my position was as a single, working mother, one emergency away from looking unreliable, one crisis away from jeopardizing the job I needed to keep the lights on and food on the table. The drive to the juvenile detention center took 23 minutes through downtown Clearwater Bay traffic, and every minute felt like an hour. I kept replaying the conversation with my mother, looking for clues, for some explanation that would make sense of what seemed impossible. Sophia had been acting differently lately, that much was true. More withdrawn, more secretive about where she went after school and who she spent time with. But I'd attributed that to normal teenage development, the natural process of individuating from her parent as she figured out who she was becoming. It never occurred to me that she might be getting into serious trouble. Then again, maybe I hadn't been paying close enough attention. Between work deadlines and the stress of managing our finances on my own and trying to navigate co-parenting with my ex-husband James, who lived 2 states away and seemed to view his parental responsibilities as optional, maybe I'd missed something important. The juvenile detention center was a gray concrete building that looked exactly like what it was, a place where childhood went to die. I parked in the visitor lot and sat in my car for a moment, trying to prepare myself for whatever I was about to face. Through the windshield, I could see other parents walking in and out of the building, their faces wearing expressions I recognized: exhaustion, disappointment, fear, the particular kind of defeat that comes when your child's choices force you to confront your own failures as a parent. The intake process was humiliating in the way that bureaucratic systems are designed to be: forms to fill out, explanations to give, proof of identity and relationship to provide. The officer at the front desk, a tired-looking woman in her 50s named Officer Martinez, spoke to me with the kind of professional sympathy that suggested she'd delivered this news to countless parents before me. "Your daughter was brought in around 2:30 this afternoon," she explained, consulting her computer screen. "Shoplifting charge from Millbrook's department store. The store manager and the employee who witnessed the theft both gave statements. She'll be released to your custody, but there will be a court date scheduled within the next 2 weeks. Can I see her?" "Of course. She's been asking for you." The room where they brought Sophia was sterile and fluorescent bright, with plastic chairs and a table that looked like it had been scrubbed with industrial disinfectant. When the door opened and my daughter walked in, wearing an orange jumpsuit that was too big for her slight frame, I felt my heart break into pieces. She looked so young, so scared, so completely unlike the confident teenager who had left for school that morning in her favorite jeans and the vintage band t-shirt we'd found at the thrift store last weekend. Her dark hair, usually perfectly styled, was tangled and messy. Her eyes were red from crying. "Mom," she said, and threw herself into my arms with the desperation of someone who had been drowning and finally saw a life preserver. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, holding her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo mixed with the institutional smell of the detention center. "We're going to figure this out." "I didn't do it, Mom. I swear I didn't steal anything. I don't understand why this is happening." I pulled back to look at her face, searching for any sign of deception, any hint that she was lying to herself from consequences. But all I saw was confusion, fear, and the absolute certainty of someone telling the truth. "Tell me exactly what happened today." Sophia wiped her nose with the sleeve of the orange jumpsuit and took a shaky breath. "Riley, Zoe and I went to Millbrook's after school. We were just looking around, trying on makeup samples, you know? We do that sometimes when we're bored. We weren't buying anything there because it's too expensive." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. "We were in the cosmetics section, and your mom was working. She came over and started talking to us, asking what we were looking for, being really nice. Which was weird because she's usually—" Sophia paused, clearly trying to find a diplomatic way to describe her grandmother's typical attitude toward her friends. "She's usually not that friendly to your friends," I finished. "Right, but she was being super sweet, asking about school, complimenting Zoe's hair. Then she suggested we look at some scarves in the accessories section. She said there was a sale." "And then what happened?"
We went over there and looked at some scarves. They were really pretty, but way too expensive. Like $200 for a scarf. Riley made a joke about how you could buy groceries for a week for that much money. Sophia's voice was getting stronger as she told the story, more confident. Then Grandma Margaret said she had to get back to work, and we left. "You left the store?" "Yeah, we walked to the food court in the mall and got smoothies. We were there for maybe half an hour, just talking and doing homework. Then all of a sudden, security guards showed up and said I needed to come with them. They said I'd stolen a scarf from Millbrook's." I studied my daughter's face. 15 years of parenting had taught me to recognize when she was lying, the way her eyes would dart to the left, the slight tremor in her voice, the fidgeting with her hands. None of those tells were present now. "They searched my backpack right there in the food court in front of everyone," Sophia continued, and I could hear the humiliation in her voice. "And they found a scarf in there. But Mom, I swear I didn't put it there. I have no idea how it got in my bag." "What kind of scarf?" "One of those designer ones we were looking at, navy blue with gold trim. It still had the tags on it and everything." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Did you notice when the scarf might have been put in your bag?" Sophia shook her head. "I left my backpack in the cosmetics section for a few minutes when we first got to the store. Grandma Margaret said I could leave it behind the counter while we looked around, since it was heavy with textbooks. She said it would be safer there." The pieces of the puzzle were starting to arrange themselves in my mind, forming a picture I didn't want to see. My mother had access to Sophia's backpack. She had directed the girls to look at the scarves. She had been unusually friendly and helpful. But why would my own mother frame my daughter for shoplifting? What possible motive could she have? "Mom," Sophia's voice was small, uncertain. "You believe me, right? I know it looks bad, but I really didn't steal anything." I looked into my daughter's eyes that were the same shade of brown as mine, inherited from 3 generations of women in our family, and I saw nothing but truth. "I believe you," I said, and meant it completely. The relief that flooded Sophia's face was so profound that it confirmed everything I needed to know. This was not the face of someone who had been caught in the lie and was grateful to be forgiven anyway. This was the face of someone who had been telling the truth and was finally being believed. "So, what do we do now?" she asked. "Now we go home," I said, standing up and smoothing down my work skirt, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "And then we figure out exactly what happened and why." As we walked out of the juvenile detention center together, my arm around Sophia's shoulders, I found myself thinking about the satisfaction I'd heard in my mother's voice during that phone call, the way she'd said red-handed with such certainty, the way she had immediately launched into criticism of my parenting, as if this incident was something she'd been waiting for, preparing for. By the time we reached my car, a terrible suspicion was beginning to form in my mind. But it was so awful, so unthinkable, that I pushed it away. Surely my own mother wouldn't deliberately sabotage her granddaughter just to prove a point about my parenting. Surely even Margaret Whitmore wouldn't sink that low. But as I drove home through the darkening streets of Clearwater Bay, with my daughter silent and shell-shocked in the passenger seat, I found myself confronted with the idea that I was about to discover just how wrong I was about the people I thought I could trust. The real shock wasn't that Sophia had been arrested. The real shock was what I was going to learn about who put that scarf in her backpack and why. And when I finally uncovered the truth, it would change everything I thought I knew about my family, my mother, and the lengths some people will go to in order to be right. Before that Tuesday afternoon call shattered everything, our life in Clearwater Bay had finally started to feel stable. Not perfect. Single motherhood is rarely perfect, but manageable in a way that felt like genuine progress after years of chaos. Sophia and I had developed our routines. Monday through Friday mornings began at 6:30 a.m. with her alarm playing some indie song I pretended to hate but secretly found catchy. She'd stumble to the kitchen in her pajamas, hair in a messy bun, while I made coffee and packed for lunch. We'd eat breakfast together, usually toast and fruit, sometimes leftover pizza if we were being rebels. And she'd tell me about whatever teenage drama was unfolding at Jefferson High School. "Riley thinks Marcus likes her because he shared his chips at lunch," she'd say, rolling her eyes but unable to hide her smile. "And Zoe is convinced Mr. Peterson is going to fail her in chemistry because she accidentally called him Mr. Patterson for 3 weeks straight." These morning conversations were sacred to me. 15-year-olds aren't known for oversharing with their parents, but Sophia had always been unusually open about her life. She told me about her friends, her crushes, her anxieties about college applications that were still 2 years away. I treasured these glimpses into her world, partly because I remember being her age and telling my mother absolutely nothing.
Margaret Whitmore had never been the kind of mother who invited confidences. Even when I was Sophia's age, our breakfast conversations consisted mainly of criticism disguised as concern. "Your hair looks flat today, Cassandra. Did you even brush it?" Or, "That shirt makes you look heavier than you are. Maybe try the blue one instead." I'd promised myself I would be different with Sophia. I would be the mother who listened without judgment, who asked questions because I was genuinely interested in the answers, not because I was fishing for ammunition to use in future lectures. And for the most part, I'd succeeded. Our little duplex on Elm Street wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people to stand in comfortably. But it was ours. The walls were painted colors we'd chosen together. Sage green in the living room, lavender in Sophia's bedroom, cheerful yellow in the kitchen. We'd furnished it slowly, carefully, with pieces from thrift stores and yard sales that we'd refinished ourselves. My favorite spot was the reading nook we'd created in the living room corner, a comfortable armchair from Goodwill next to a window that looked out onto Mrs. Chen's garden. Sophia had surprised me last Christmas by framing a photo of the 2 of us from her 8th grade graduation and placing it on the bookshelf next to the chair. We both looked tired in the photo. It had been taken just 6 months after the divorce was finalized, but we were smiling real smiles, the kind that reach your eyes. Evenings followed their own comfortable patterns. Sophia would do homework at the kitchen table while I cooked dinner, usually something simple but nutritious. I had learned to cook out of necessity during the divorce, when ordering takeout stopped being financially viable, and I realized that mac and cheese from a box wasn't going to cut it as a steady diet for a growing teenager. "Mom, do you think I'm good at writing?" Sophia had asked, just a week before the incident, looking up from an English essay about symbolism in To Kill a Mockingbird. "I think you're good at everything you put effort into," I'd answered, seasoning the chicken I was preparing for dinner. "Why? Are you worried about the essay?" "Not worried exactly, just I really like doing it. Writing, I mean, even when it's hard." She chewed on the end of her pen, a habit I'd been trying to break her of since middle school. "Do you think that means something?" "I think it means you found something you're passionate about. That's not something to take lightly." These were the conversations that reminded me why all the stress of single parenting was worth it. These moments when I could see Sophia figuring out who she was becoming, when I could offer guidance without trying to control the outcome.
Our weekends had their rhythms too. Saturday mornings meant grocery shopping together at the Clearwater Bay market, where Sophia would try to sneak expensive snacks into the cart while I pretended not to notice. Saturday afternoons were for errands and household projects, laundry, cleaning, the endless maintenance that comes with trying to keep a home running smoothly on a tight budget. Sunday mornings were ours to be lazy. We'd sleep in, make pancakes, and watch old movies on the couch. Sophia had recently developed an appreciation for classic films, particularly anything with Audrey Hepburn, and I loved watching her discover movies that had been important to me when I was her age. "I can't believe people dressed like that every day," she'd said during breakfast at Tiffany's, gesturing at Audrey's elegant black dress. "Like, imagine having to look that put together just to go to the grocery store." "Different era," I'd replied, thinking about my own weekend uniform of yoga pants and oversized sweaters. Women had a lot less freedom, but the fashion was incredible. Work at Riverside Marketing Solutions had settled into a comfortable groove as well. I'd been there for 2 years, long enough to prove myself competent, but not so long that I felt trapped. My boss, Linda Harrison, was a rarity in the business world, a woman who understood that employees with rich personal lives were more productive, not less. She didn't make me feel guilty for leaving early when Sophia had a school event or needed to be picked up sick from class. My colleagues had become genuine friends. Sarah Martinez in accounting always remembered to ask about Sophia's soccer games, even though Sophia had quit the team freshman year. Tom Bradley, in creative services, had teenage sons of his own and often shared strategies for navigating the particular challenges of parenting adolescents. "The key is to pick your battles," he'd told me just a month earlier when I'd mentioned Sophia's increasing resistance to our 10 p.m. curfew on school nights. "Some hills are worth dying on. Others aren't worth the energy." It was good advice, and I had been trying to follow it. The messy bedroom? Not worth a fight. The tendency to leave dishes in the sink instead of loading them directly into the dishwasher? Annoying, but manageable. The occasional eye roll when I reminded her to text me when she arrived safely at friends' houses? Normal teenage boundary testing. The relationship with my mother, Margaret, had been more complicated but seemingly stable. She'd been working at Millbrook's department store for 6 months, ever since Derek moved out and left her scrambling to cover her portion of the rent on her apartment. The job seemed to suit her. She'd always had strong opinions about fashion and beauty, and working in cosmetics gave her an audience for her expertise. Our interactions had fallen into a predictable pattern. She'd call every couple of weeks, usually to complain about work drama or to offer unsolicited advice about my parenting choices. I'd listen politely, deflect the criticism when possible, and keep the conversations short.
"You're too lenient with that girl," had become her favorite refrain. "She needs more structure, more discipline. You can't be her friend, Cassandra. You need to be her mother." I'd learned to respond with non-committal sounds. And "I'll think about that," rather than engaging in arguments I couldn't win. Margaret had strong opinions about everything, and she interpreted disagreement as disrespect. It was easier to let her say her piece and then do whatever I thought was best for Sophia and our family. The irony wasn't lost on me that my mother criticized my parenting while barely maintaining a relationship with her own granddaughter. Margaret saw Sophia maybe once a month, usually when I brought her along for brief visits that felt more obligatory than enjoyable. She'd make superficial conversation about school and friends, but she'd never shown genuine interest in understanding who Sophia was as a person. "Grandma Margaret is kinda weird," Sophia had observed after our last visit, about 3 weeks before the incident. "She asks questions but doesn't really listen to the answers, and she keeps trying to give me makeup tips like I'm still 12. I'd laughed, but privately I'd felt sad about the relationship my daughter was missing. My own grandmother, Margaret's mother, had been warm and engaged, genuinely interested in my thoughts and dreams. She'd been the adult I could talk to when my mother felt too critical or demanding. Sophia didn't have that kind of grandmother figure, and I sometimes worried about what she was missing. But overall, our life felt good. Challenging, certainly. Single parenting always is, but good in the ways that mattered. Sophia was thriving academically and socially. She had close friendships with Riley and Zoe, girls I genuinely liked and trusted. She was starting to think seriously about her future, exploring interests in writing and journalism that excited her. I was building a career I could be proud of,
earning enough to keep us comfortable, if not wealthy. I was learning to trust my instincts as a parent, to stop second-guessing every decision based on my mother's criticism or my ex-husband's absence. Most importantly, Sophia and I had built something together, a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection. We still told me about her crushes and her fears, her dreams and her disappointments. We still laughed together at inside jokes and cried together during sad movies. That Tuesday morning, the morning of the incident, had started like any other. Sophia's alarm, breakfast conversation about Riley's romantic drama, the usual rush to gather backpacks and car keys. She'd kissed my cheek goodbye, reminded me that she'd be staying after school for study group, and promised to text when she got home. "Love you, Mom," she'd called as she climbed out of the car in front of Jefferson High. "Love you too, maybe. Have a good day." It was such an ordinary exchange, the kind of routine interaction that happens thousands of times in the life of a family. I couldn't have known it would be the last normal moment we'd share for a very long time. By that evening, everything would be different. The trust we'd built, the stability we'd created, the future we'd been planning, all of it would be threatened by forces I hadn't seen coming and couldn't have prepared for. But that morning, driving to work through the familiar streets of Clearwater Bay, I still believed in the safety of our ordinary life.